She walked into the ballroom bleeding, not from a stranger, not from war, from her own family's hands. Militsa Volkonskaya had been their secret for 19 years, their shame, their burden, their silence. And tonight they decided she had lived long enough. Her white gown soaked through, her steps slow, her eyes searching a room full of faces that looked right through her. She had one thought before her knees gave way and the marble floor rushed up to meet her. No one is coming. She was wrong, because across that glittering ballroom, through the candlelight and the laughter and the lies, Duke Vsevolod Ratimir had already seen everything. But here's what I need you to ask yourself. Why did her own blood raise a blade against her? What did Militsa know that made her so dangerous to them? And why was a man as powerful and cold as Duke Vsevolod Ratimir already watching her before she even fell? If you want to find out what the Duke does next, whether he saves her, uses her, or falls completely undone by her, subscribe right now. Hit that bell, because this story is only getting darker, and trust me, you do not want to miss what comes next. She did not scream when she fell. That was the thing nobody talked about afterward. In a room full of women who fainted for sport, who collapsed dramatically at the first sign of scandal or heat or a man's cold shoulder, Militsa Volkonskaya went down in complete silence. No gasp, no cry. Just a slow, quiet surrender to the marble floor, like a candle that had simply run out of wax. The music did not stop. The laughter did not quiet. The crystal glasses kept catching the light. That was the cruelty of ballrooms. They did not pause for dying girls. But one man paused. He had been standing near the far window when it happened, half turned from the room, a glass of something dark held loosely in his fingers. He had not been watching her the way men usually watched women at these gatherings, with appetite or calculation or performance. He had been watching her the way a man watches something that does not fit, something that pulls at the edge of his attention, the way a loose thread pulls at a fine coat. She had walked through the main doors at the top of the staircase, and something about the way she moved had made him go still. It was not her gown, though the white silk was striking. It was not her face, though her face was the kind that made a room quietly rearrange itself. It was the way she was holding herself together. He had seen soldiers do it, men who had taken a wound in battle and were still on their feet through nothing but will, their bodies already losing the argument their minds refused to accept. He had seen that particular stillness before, and it had never once meant anything good. So when her knees gave way, Vsevolod Ratimir was already moving. He crossed the ballroom floor in long, unhurried strides that still somehow covered the distance faster than they should have. The crowd parted without quite knowing why, the way crowds always parted for him, that particular quality he carried in his shoulders and his silence that made people step aside without being asked. He reached her before the nearest footman had even registered what was happening, before the women closest to her had done anything more than raise their fans and murmur. He crouched beside her, and his first instinct, the one that came from years of conflict and hard choices, was to assess, not to comfort, to understand what he was dealing with. Her breathing was shallow but present. Her pulse, when he pressed 2 fingers briefly to her wrist, was thin and fast. Her skin was the temperature of someone whose body was in quiet crisis. And then he saw the red spreading through the white silk at her side, slow and dark, the kind of stain that did not come from a fall. That was when his jaw tightened. He had seen enough wounds to know that one. He had given enough orders on enough battlefields to know what a blade did to a body, and how long a person could keep moving after one, before the body simply stopped cooperating. Whoever had done this had known exactly what they were doing, enough damage to eventually stop her. Not so much that she would drop immediately and cause a scene before she even arrived. They had wanted her to make it here first. The thought moved through him cold and clean, like winter water, and he filed it away because there was no time for it now. He slid one arm beneath her shoulders and one beneath her knees and stood, and she weighed almost nothing, and that bothered him more than anything else had yet. "Clear a path," he said, and his voice was not loud, but it was the kind of voice that did not need volume, the kind that had directed artillery fire and contract negotiations with equal composure, and the crowd fell back immediately. He carried her out of the ballroom. Behind him, he heard the whispers, beginning their usual industrious work, voices threading together into a fabric of speculation and delight. He paid it no attention. He had survived far worse than being the subject of gossip, and he had learned very early that the only people who feared a scandal were people who needed the good opinion of fools. He did not need anyone's good opinion. He took her to the small sitting room off the second corridor, the one that was always kept empty during these events, because the hostess used it as a place to retreat from her own parties. He laid Militsa down on the long settee near the fireplace and reached for the bell pull without looking away from her face. She was beginning to come back. He could see it in the way her eyes moved beneath their lids, the way her fingers twitched against the cushion. Pain was pulling her toward the surface, and that was both good news and not. He kept his eyes on her and tried to decide what he felt about any of this, and found, with some irritation, that the answer was not as simple as he needed it to be. He had seen her before tonight. Not met, not spoken to. He was almost certain she did not know he existed, which would have suited him fine 6 months ago. But he had seen her twice at a distance, and both times something had caught in him, some small barbed thing he had not been able to name or remove. The first time had been in a park in early autumn, and she had been sitting alone on a bench feeding bread to pigeons with the focused generosity of someone who was in the habit of giving what little they had to things smaller and more vulnerable than themselves. The second time had been at a dinner he had attended only out of obligation, and she had been seated far down the table from him, saying very little, smiling only when spoken to, and the smile had never once touched her eyes. He had noticed that. He noticed things like that. He had spent enough of his life in rooms full of lies to develop a sensitivity to the difference between a real expression and a performed one. Her smiles at that dinner had been performed so flawlessly that he suspected she had been doing it for years. He had not sought her out after either occasion. He was not a man who sought people out. People came to him with proposals and requests and problems that needed solving, and he engaged with them on those terms or not at all. Personal interest was a complication he had learned to manage carefully. Like an old injury that flared in cold weather, you accounted for it. You did not let it make your decisions. But she was bleeding on a settee in a borrowed room, and her own family had put her here, and he found that his careful management was under some strain. She opened her eyes. They were grey and very direct, and the first thing they did when they found his face was something he had not expected. They did not widen with fear. They did not fill with relief. They looked at him the way someone looks at a thing they are trying to rapidly calculate the meaning of, weighing it, measuring it, deciding before they had nearly enough information. He respected that. "You carried me," she said. Her voice was rough and low, and she said it not as a thank you and not as a complaint, but as a simple statement of fact, something she was fitting into an account of events she was trying to reconstruct. You fell," he said. "I am aware." She tried to sit up and stopped immediately, and something moved across her face that she controlled before it could become a sound. Her hand pressed flat against her side. "Don't," he said. She looked at him again with those grey, calculating eyes. "Who are you?" "Vsevolod Ratimir." He watched her process that. He watched the small, almost invisible adjustment that happened in people's faces when they connected a name to a reputation and tried to recalibrate what they thought was happening. Most people, when they made that adjustment, became careful, became smaller, turned on some version of performance. Militsa Volkonskaya's expression did not change at all. "The Duke," she said flatly. "Yes." "Why did you carry me?" It was such a direct question, such an unreasonable, completely sensible question, that almost nobody in her position would have had the nerve or the presence to ask. He found himself looking at her with something that was almost the beginning of being interested in a person rather than the idea of one. "Because no one else was going to," he said. She said nothing to that. She looked at the ceiling, and he watched her chest rise and fall with careful, deliberate breaths, watched her managing her pain with the same quiet ferocity she had apparently managed everything else in her life. The fire cracked in the grate. Somewhere down the corridor the orchestra had resumed. She had not told him what happened. She had not asked for his help. She had not cried. And he had the strong and unsettling feeling that she was not going to. Who had done this to her, and why had they chosen tonight? And what had Militsa Volkonskaya done or seen or known that had made her own blood decide she needed to be silenced in a ballroom full of witnesses? The questions sat in him, sharp and patient. He intended to find out the answers. The physician came and went, and said the things physicians say when they want to sound calm and mean the opposite. The wound needed cleaning. The wound needed rest. The wound was serious but not mortal, which was the particular kind of news that felt like relief until you sat with it long enough to understand it only meant the people who had put it there had miscalculated slightly. Militsa lay still through all of it. She had become very good at lying still. She had learnt it young, the way children learn the things that keep them safe. In a house where stillness was survival, where drawing attention meant drawing fire, you developed an almost animal instinct for making yourself small and quiet and easy to overlook. She had been overlooked for most of her 19 years, and there had been a time when that had hurt her, when she had wanted to be seen the way other girls wanted things, with a fierce and wordless longing that she could not explain and would not have been permitted to voice. That time had passed. She did not remember exactly when she had stopped wanting to be seen and started simply wanting to survive. The shift had happened gradually, the way most important changes happen, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the slow accumulation of small ones. A door shut in her face, a meal withheld. A name said in the tone that meant she was not a daughter but a problem, not a person but an inconvenience that had outlasted its welcome in a house that had never truly offered any. Her mother had married her father for his title, and discovered too late that titles without money were decorative at best and suffocating at worst. Her father had married her mother for her beauty, and discovered too late that beautiful women who are also deeply unhappy become, over time, something else entirely. Militsa had been born into the wreckage of that particular miscalculation, and had spent her entire life being reminded, in ways both subtle and direct, that she was evidence of a mistake neither of them wished to look at. She had two brothers, Boromir, who was her father's pride and her mother's project, and Radovan, who was younger and followed Boromir with the devoted and unthinking loyalty of a dog that has only ever known one master. They had not always been cruel to her. She could remember, distantly, a version of her childhood that contained something warmer, moments of ordinary sibling closeness that felt now like scenes from a story she had read about someone else's life. But boys became men, and men became their fathers, and Boromir had become a version of their father that contained all the worst of him and none of the rare softness their father occasionally, accidentally still showed. It was Boromir who had pressed the blade against her tonight. She was almost certain of it without having seen his face clearly. She knew the particular quality of his anger, the way it moved through his body before it moved through the room. She had felt it behind her as she was preparing to enter the ballroom, that familiar shift in the air, and she had not even turned before the pain arrived. She had kept walking. That was what she could not entirely account for herself. The pain had been extraordinary, the kind that whites out the edges of your vision and makes the world go briefly silent, and her first coherent thought had not been help or stop or even why. Her first thought had been, keep moving, get inside, get where there are people. Because she had known, on some level she did not fully understand yet, that whatever her family intended for her tonight needed witnesses to fail. She was still working out what that meant. The physician had gone. The maid the Duke had sent for was doing something quiet and efficient at the far end of the room, and the Duke himself was standing near the fireplace, his coat removed now, his shirt sleeves rolled once at the wrist, his arms crossed, and his eyes on the fire, with the concentrated stillness of a man turning something over in his mind and not finding the shape of it satisfying. She watched him from under lowered lashes and thought about what she knew. Vsevolod Ratimir was 34 and had held his title for 12 years, since the death of his father, under circumstances that people discussed in careful voices and careful silences in equal measure. He had no wife. He had no apparent interest in acquiring one, which had made him the subject of considerable fascinated speculation in every drawing room Militsa had ever sat quietly in the corner of. He had served the Tsar in capacities that were not precisely military and not precisely diplomatic, and seemed to occupy some territory between the two that required both a sword and a mind, sharp enough to make the sword unnecessary most of the time. He was not a comfortable man. She had known that before tonight. The kind of power he carried was not the performed variety, not the kind that needed an audience and a set of admiring eyes to exist. It existed in him the way weather existed, as a condition of the atmosphere rather than a choice, and it made the air around him feel slightly different from the air elsewhere in a room. She should be afraid of him. She was aware that she should be afraid of him, and she was tracing the inside of herself, looking for that fear, and finding, with a kind of tired bewilderment, that it was not there. There was something else instead, something careful and watchful and not entirely unpleasant, which was confusing enough that she filed it away to examine later, when she was not bleeding and lying in a stranger's sitting room, trying to reconstruct the last hour of her life. He turned from the fire then and looked at her, and she looked back, and neither of them did the thing people usually did, which was look away. "Your family will be looking for you," he said. "Yes," she said. "Are you going to tell me what happened?" She considered that with the same deliberate care she gave to most things. She had learned early that information was the only currency she had ever reliably possessed, and she did not spend it carelessly. She did not know this man. She knew his name and his reputation and the particular quality of his silence, which was deeper than most people's silence and considerably more occupied. She did not know what he wanted or what he would do with anything she told him, or whether his intervention tonight had been the instinct of a decent man or the opening move of something more calculated. "Not yet," she said. Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, more like the adjustment of a man who had expected a particular kind of answer and received a different one and found the difference interesting. "Not yet," he repeated. "I don't know you," she said. "You carried me out of a ballroom, and you called a physician, and I am grateful for both of those things. But gratitude is not the same as trust, and I don't know you." He was quiet for a moment. The fire moved in the grate. Outside, faintly, the orchestra played something she did not recognize. "That is a reasonable position," he said. "I know." She watched him decide something. She could see it happening. the small internal recalibration, the way he weighted what she had said and what she hadn't, and arrived somewhere she couldn't quite follow. He unfolded his arms and moved to the chair near the settee and sat in it, not close, a deliberate and careful distance that she noticed, and looked at her directly. "Then I will tell you something you don't have to do anything with," he said. "Someone in that ballroom tonight wanted you to be found injured or dead in a public place. Whatever story they intended to tell afterward would have been made much simpler if you had died before anyone could question it. You did not die. That means the story they planned to tell is now considerably more complicated." He paused. "I intend to make it more complicated still." She stared at him. "Why?" she said. The question came out more raw than she intended, more honest, stripped of the careful management she usually kept in place, because the honest answer to "Why does anyone help you?" had always been, in her experience, that there was no good answer. People helped you because they wanted something from you. People helped you because it made them feel powerful. People helped you accidentally and then resented the inconvenience. Nobody had ever helped her simply because she needed it. He looked at her for a long moment, and she had the discomforting sensation of being read, of something behind his eyes moving through her like a slow and very thorough tide. "I don't know yet," he said finally, and somehow that was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. She felt something shift in her chest, small and quiet, like a locked door that had not opened but had, for the first time in a very long time, been knocked on. She turned her eyes to the ceiling and breathed carefully, and told herself that one honest answer from a powerful man did not constitute safety, and that she had survived this long by not confusing the two. But she was very tired, tired in a way that went so much deeper than tonight. Tired in the way of someone who had been holding something heavy for so long that the holding had become indistinguishable from living, and she could no longer clearly imagine what it might feel like to put it down. She had come to that ballroom tonight because her family had told her to. She had come because refusing would have cost her more than complying, because that was always the calculation, because she had been making that calculation since she was old enough to understand what it meant: comply, survive, find the smallest margin of safety and live inside it. She had not known they intended the ballroom to be her ending. She thought about Boromir's face at dinner 2 weeks ago, the way he had looked at her across the table with something that had no warmth in it at all, something that had moved through her like a cold draught through a cracked window. She thought about the conversations that had stopped when she entered rooms these past months, the way her mother had begun looking at her with an expression that was not quite grief and not quite guilt, and landed somewhere in the terrible space between the two. She had known something was coming. She had not known what shape it would take. Now she did. And lying here in the firelight with a wound in her side, and a duke she did not know sitting 3 feet from her with his sleeves rolled and his eyes steady, she felt, beneath the exhaustion and the pain and the careful management of everything, one thing burning clean and quiet. She was not going to comply anymore, whatever that cost her, whatever came next. Something had broken tonight that she did not intend to repair. Some final willingness to make herself small enough and quiet enough and easy enough to ignore. They had pushed her past the place where survival and surrender felt like the same thing. She did not know what came after that. She did not know what she was, exactly, without the long habit of endurance. But she was beginning to think, with a focus that surprised her given how much blood she had lost, that Vsevolod Ratimir might be the most useful and the most dangerous person to have stumbled into on the night she finally decided to stop disappearing. The question was what he wanted. The question was what she was willing to give. The fire burned. He did not look away. Neither did she. He was the first to speak, and she had not expected that either. "Your brother Boromir," he said. "How long has he been in debt to Gennady Sviatkov?" The name hit her like cold water. She did not move, did not blink, gave him nothing on the outside. But inside, something lurched and steadied and lurched again. Sviatkov was not a name people said in comfortable rooms. He was the kind of man who existed in the parts of the city that did not appear on the maps wealthy families kept in their libraries. He collected debts the way other men collected art, with patience and a deep appreciation for the moment of maximum leverage. "How do you know that name?" she said. "I know most names worth knowing," Vsevolod said. There was no arrogance in it. He said it the way you state weather. "Boromir has been borrowing against your family's remaining assets for 2 years. He ran through his own share before that. He is currently short by an amount that would make a reasonable man lose sleep, and Boromir is not, from what I understand, a reasonable man." She stared at the ceiling. The maid had gone. It was only the two of them now, and the fire and the distant sound of a party continuing without her, which was perhaps the most honest summary of her life she had ever encountered. "There is a property," she said slowly. "My grandmother's. It came down through the women in my family. It was meant to come to me. Meant to? My father signed something 2 years ago. I don't know exactly what. But I noticed things changing after that. The way Boromir looked at me, the way my mother stopped meeting my eyes." She paused. "The property cannot transfer cleanly while I am alive and contesting it. I didn't know I was contesting it. I didn't even know what had been signed. But apparently the fact that I exist is contest enough." She heard him breathe out slowly through his nose. "So they brought you to the most public room in the city," he said, "and put a wound in you that would take its time, and planned to find you collapsed before the evening was out. A tragic event. A young woman with a history of delicate health." He stopped. "Do you have a history of delicate health?" "My family has been telling people I do for the past year." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of him thinking and her watching him think, and neither of them pretending otherwise. "They were building the story before they needed it," he said. "Yes." He stood then, not in agitation, not the way men stood when they needed to release something, but with purpose, moving to the small writing desk in the corner and pulling open the top drawer with the easy familiarity of a man who was accustomed to knowing where things were in rooms that were not his. He found paper and sat and began writing something, and she watched him and did not ask, because she was busy doing the calculation she always did, the one where she tried to determine what a person's investment in her situation was going to cost her. She could not find the angle. That bothered her more than she would have liked. Men with power who involved themselves in the problems of women without it always had an angle. She had watched it happen to other women, watched the apparent rescues that were in fact acquisitions dressed in gentler language, and she had always been grateful in a distant way that nobody had thought her worth acquiring. Now she was less certain what to be grateful for. "I'm not going to take your property," he said without looking up from the paper. She had not said that out loud. Her jaw tightened slightly. "I didn't ask," she said. "You were thinking it loudly enough." He wrote something else, folded the paper with 2 efficient movements, and set it aside. Then he looked at her. "I have a great deal of property. I have no use for more. What I do not have, and what I find I am apparently acquiring an interest in regardless, is an explanation for why a family of moderately ruined nobles, with pretensions above their current station, thought they could do what they did tonight and face no consequence. Most people would say they were right to think that," she said carefully. "Most people," he said, "are not me." There it was. Not arrogance exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that was actually just the plain, unvarnished truth of a man who understood his own weight in the world with complete clarity and had long since stopped pretending otherwise out of false modesty. She had met men who wielded their power like a weapon they were constantly brandishing. Vsevolod Ratimir wielded his like a coat he had simply stopped taking off. It was just part of him, part of the atmosphere he occupied. She found it, to her considerable irritation, reassuring. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Tonight, make sure you are safe and that your family believes you are either dying or already dead, whichever buys more time. Tomorrow, find out exactly what was signed and when, and whether it holds. After that, we will see." "We," she said. He met her eyes. "You are going to have to trust someone eventually, Militsa Volkonskaya. Your options at this particular moment are limited." The use of her full name did something strange in her chest. Not unpleasant, just sudden, like a sound in a quiet room. Nobody said her name like it meant something. It had always been said in the tone of a problem being identified. "I told you I don't know you," she said. "You also told me not yet," he said. "There is a difference." She had not thought he would remember that. Or rather, she had noticed that he was the kind of man who remembered everything, and she had not thought he would deploy it so directly. She looked at him, and he looked back, and she thought, with some desperation, about all the reasons this was an extraordinarily bad idea, and found that the list, while real and valid and sensible, was having very little effect on the part of her that had already decided something. She was so tired of being alone in her own danger. "My grandmother's property," she said. "It's called Veradino. It's 3 days east of the city. My grandmother raised me there for 4 years before my parents brought me back, and I have not been allowed to return." She paused. "It is the only place I have ever been happy." She had not meant to say that last part. It came out of some unguarded place she had not been quick enough to close, and she felt the exposure of it move across her skin like a draught. She did not look away from him, because looking away would have made it worse, would have made it something to be embarrassed about, rather than just a fact she had accidentally shared. He did not make it strange. He simply received it, filed it in whatever careful interior space he used for things that mattered, and said, "Then we will make certain it remains yours." She did not understand why that nearly undid her. After everything, after the blade and the marble floor, and the slow, careful reconstruction of herself in this firelit room, it was 4 words that nearly cracked her. She set her teeth and breathed, and told herself it was the blood loss and the shock and the particular vulnerability of being in pain in front of someone who was being unexpectedly decent, all of which were reasonable explanations that she almost believed. She was still looking at him. He was still looking at her. And there was something in the air between them that had not been there an hour ago, something she did not have a clean word for, something that was not yet anything definable, but was also clearly not nothing. It moved like heat moves, not in a straight line, not in a rush, just spreading slowly through the available space until the space itself felt different. She needed him to look away, or say something practical, or do anything that would let her put this back in a manageable category. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, and said very quietly, "Are you in pain?" Such a simple question. Such a completely ordinary question that a person asks when another person is injured. She had no reasonable explanation for why it required several seconds to answer. "Yes," she said. "I know," he said. "I am asking because I want you to tell me when it becomes worse. Not to be stoic about it, not to manage it quietly, because that is what you have always done. If it becomes worse, tell me." She opened her mouth and closed it. "You don't need to disappear in this room," he said. "There is no one here who needs you to be smaller than you are." Something moved through her that she could not name and did not try to. She turned her face away from him toward the fire and breathed through it, and did not let it become anything visible, but it moved through her slowly and thoroughly, like light through a room that had been shut too long. She was still thinking about Boromir, about the expression on her mother's face these past months, about the paper her father had signed, and whatever it meant, and how long they had been preparing the version of her life that ended in a borrowed room at a party. A young woman of delicate health who had simply not survived the season. She was also thinking about Vsevolod Ratimir and the way he said "we." The door opened. They both looked up. It was the maid, pale-faced and quick, who stepped inside and closed the door behind her with the particular urgency of someone carrying news they have not decided how to say. "Your Grace," she said, looking at Vsevolod. "Her brother is here, Boromir Volkonskaya. He is in the corridor and he is asking for his sister." A breath. "He says he has come to take her home." The room went very still. Militsa felt the wound in her side, like a sentence being read aloud. She felt her hands go flat and quiet against the cushion, and her mind go to the particular cold clarity it reached under pressure, that narrow place where fear and focus were indistinguishable from each other. She looked at Vsevolod. His face had changed, not dramatically. Someone who did not know how to read stillness would have said he looked exactly the same. But she had been watching him for over an hour now, and she could see the difference, the way a room looks the same but feels different when something has changed in it. His eyes had gone to a place behind their surface. Something had drawn back from the visible parts of him and gone inward, and what remained on the outside was very calm and very deliberate, and she thought, extremely dangerous. He stood. "Tell him," Vsevolod said to the maid, and his voice was so steady it was almost gentle, "that his sister is not available." The maid hesitated. "He was quite insistent, Your Grace," he said. "Tell him," Vsevolod said again, the same tone, the same quietness. The absolute, immovable certainty of a man who had never in his adult life needed to repeat himself, and was doing so now only as a courtesy, that she is not available. The maid left. Militsa lay still in the firelight and thought about the corridor outside that door, and the man standing in it who had put a blade in her earlier in the evening and was now presenting himself as a concerned brother. And she thought about all the ways that story could be made to work if she was not alive to contradict it. Then she thought about Vsevolod standing between her and that corridor, with his shirt sleeves rolled and his hands quiet at his sides, and that particular quality of atmosphere he carried. And then she thought about something else, something colder and more frightening than Boromir, something she had not let herself fully think yet, because the thinking of it required a steadiness she was only just now finding. If Boromir was here, it meant someone at this party had already sent word to her family that she had not died quietly. It meant someone at this party was working with them. It meant she was not safe, even here. Her eyes went to Vsevolod's back, and she watched him stand facing the door with that unreadable steadiness. And she thought about trust and the price of it, and whether there was any version of the next hour that did not require her to make a decision she could not take back. The fire cracked. The music drifted. Somewhere on the other side of a closed door, her brother was waiting. And she still did not know, not entirely, not with the certainty she needed, whose side the man in front of her was actually on. The door did not open again immediately, and that was almost worse. Militsa knew Boromir. She knew the particular patience he was capable of when he wanted something badly enough, the way he could go still and quiet and wait with the focused calm of a man who had already decided the outcome and was simply allowing time to catch up with his intentions. That patience had always frightened her more than his temper. His temper was loud and visible and gave you something to brace against. His patience was a different thing entirely. It was the kind that planned. She pushed herself upright. The pain arrived immediately, thorough and insistent, and she set her teeth against it and kept moving, because lying down when Boromir was 20 feet away felt like a choice she could not afford to make. Vsevolod turned at the sound of her moving and crossed the room in 3 strides. "Don't," he said. "I need to sit up," she said. "I need to be able to think, and I cannot think lying down with my brother in the corridor." He looked at her for 1 moment, measuring something, and then he helped her. His hands were careful in a way she had not expected, not tentative, but deliberate, like a man who understood how to handle something that needed steadiness rather than strength. She got upright, and the room tilted briefly, and then settled, and she breathed through it until her vision cleared. "Thank you," she said. He had not moved back. He was close, closer than he had been at any point in the evening, and she was acutely aware of it in a way that had nothing to do with threat and everything to do with something she did not have a category for yet. "You said someone at this party sent word to your family," he said quietly. "You said it with the expression of someone who has just understood something they had been missing." She looked up at him. "You noticed that?" "I notice most things." She believed him completely. There were only 3 people who knew which room you brought me to: the maid, the physician, and whoever sent them. She paused. "The physician was not your usual man." Something shifted in his face. "No, he was recommended tonight by the hostess. I accepted the recommendation because it was faster than sending for my own." A beat of silence. "That was careless of me." She had not expected him to say that. Men like him did not usually say that. She filed it away with the other unexpected things he had said and done this evening, and tried not to think about how the list was becoming long enough to constitute a pattern. "He could have told my family simply that I was alive," she said. "Or he could have told them something about my condition that they would want to act on quickly." She looked at the door. "Either way, Boromir being here tells me we have less time than we thought." "We," he said. She caught the echo, knew he was returning it to her deliberately, and felt something move through her that might, in a different life, have been the beginning of a smile. "Don't make something of it," she said. "I wouldn't dream of it," he said, and the faint and careful quality of that response was so unexpected that she did look at him then, quickly, trying to catch what was in his expression. She caught something. She was not certain what it was, but it was not nothing, and it was not calculated, and that was the most alarming thing about it. The door opened. Not the maid this time. Boromir Volkonskaya was taller than Vsevolod, and broader, and he entered a room the way he entered everything, like a man who had already decided it belonged to him and was simply doing the paperwork of occupying it. He was conventionally handsome in the way of men who have never faced a consequence. His features, arranged in an expression of concern so practiced that someone who did not know him might have believed it entirely. Militsa knew him. She watched his eyes move from her to Vsevolod and then back to her, and she saw the fraction of a second where his actual face showed through, where the relief was not the relief of a worried brother, but the relief of a man who had expected a problem to have resolved itself and was recalibrating because it had not. "Milia," he said, using the childhood name, the soft one, the one that had stopped meaning anything warm a long time ago but still functioned as a tool. He moved toward her. Vsevolod did not move. He simply remained where he was, which happened to be between Boromir and the settee, and the effect of it was quiet and complete. Boromir stopped. The 2 men looked at each other. Militsa watched it, and understood something she had never quite understood before, about the difference between power and its performance. Boromir performed power. He had learnt it from their father, the raised voice, the deliberate taking up of space, the insistence on being the largest presence in a room by sheer assertion of it. It worked on people who had no reference point for what real authority felt like. Vsevolod did not perform anything. He simply was what he was, and what he was made Boromir's performance look like a child banging on a locked door. "Your Grace," Boromir said, and his voice was smooth and controlled. I am grateful you assisted my sister. She has always been delicate, and I'm afraid the evening has been too much for her. I've come to take her home. She is not going home, Vsevolod said. The smoothness in Boromir's expression shifted slightly. I'm afraid I don't understand. I think you understand perfectly well, Vsevolod said. But I will be plain for the sake of efficiency. Your sister has a wound in her side that did not come from falling. She is not going anywhere with you tonight. She is not going anywhere with you tomorrow. She is, as of this evening, under my protection. If you have any further questions about what that means in practical terms, I encourage you to consult a solicitor and then think very carefully about your next action. The room was completely quiet. Militsa watched Boromir's face do something she had never seen it do before. She had seen him angry. She had seen him contemptuous and cold, and the particular cruelty that came out of him when he had an audience, and she did not. She had never seen him uncertain. It moved across his features like a shadow, and was gone in an instant, and replaced with the smooth, careful mask. But she had seen it, and she thought Vsevolod had seen it too. My sister, Boromir said carefully, is a member of my family. She is under my father's authority. I don't see how. She is 19, Vsevolod said. Which you know. And there are questions about your father's recent decisions regarding the Veradino property that I find extremely interesting and intend to pursue, which you also know, because you are not a stupid man, whatever else you may be. He paused. Leave, tonight, and take whatever story you were planning to tell and understand that it will not hold the weight you have designed it to hold, because the foundation you built it on is no longer what you think it is. Boromir looked at Militsa. She met his eyes. She did not look away, did not soften, did not give him the small unconscious signs of yielding that she had spent years giving him without knowing she was doing it. She just looked at him the way she might look at something she was deciding the value of and finding insufficient. She watched him understand that something had changed. He left without another word. The door closed. Militsa released a breath she had been holding since he walked in, and the release of it moved through her whole body, and she felt the wound in her side respond to it, and pressed her hand there, and breathed carefully, and told herself she was fine. She was fine. She had survived worse evenings than this one. She was not entirely convinced, but it was a working position. Vsevolod turned back to her, and the atmosphere in the room changed again, the particular quality of it, when it was only the two of them returned, and she was aware once more of how close he had been standing, and how she had not asked him to move back. You told him about Veradino, she said. Yes. You did that deliberately, so he would know you knew. Yes. Why? He moved to the chair again, sat in it, looked at her with those dark eyes that held so much more behind them than they showed. Because frightened men make mistakes. Because I want him frightened and making mistakes. Because the story your family has built around you functions only as long as it remains untested, and I have just told the man holding it that I intend to test it. He paused. And because I wanted him to see that you were not alone. She looked at him for a long time. You have involved yourself very thoroughly, she said, in the situation of a woman you do not know. I am aware. I want to understand why. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of evasion, but the quiet of a man choosing his words with genuine care rather than strategic precision, which was, she had learned tonight, a different kind of quiet entirely. I have spent 12 years, he said, in the service of things that needed doing, because they were the right thing to do and because I was capable of doing them. I am not a sentimental man. I do not involve myself in circumstances that do not concern me as a habit. He looked at her steadily. But I watched you walk into that room tonight already bleeding, and I watched you choose a room full of people over whatever was behind you, and I thought that was the bravest thing I had seen in a very long time. And then you went down in silence, and I thought—" He stopped. "What?" she said, and her voice was very quiet. "I thought that someone who was that determined to reach the light deserved to have someone meet her there." The fire cracked. She felt the words move through her and did not try to stop them, did not manage them or contain them or translate them into something smaller and safer. She just let them sit in her chest and do what they did. She was angry with herself for how much it meant. She was angry with how simple it was, in the end, to find the place in her that had been waiting for exactly this, for someone to say, "You deserve to be met," and mean it without wanting something from the meeting. She was not going to cry. She decided that, with considerable firmness, and then had to spend several seconds enforcing it. "I don't know how to do this," she said finally. "Do what?" "This." She gestured vaguely at the space between them, at the fire and the room and the fact of him and the evening and all of it. "Let someone help me. Let someone in. I have been managing alone for so long that I don't know the difference any more between being careful and being closed." He looked at her with that steadiness she had not yet gotten used to, that way he had of looking at a person that made you feel both entirely seen and entirely safe from the fact of it. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said. "You only have to decide not to disappear. And if I can't trust you, then you will discover that and act on it. You are not a woman who does not act." He said it without flattery, as simple observation. "But I am not asking you to trust me entirely. I am asking you to allow the possibility." She thought about the corridor outside the door. She thought about Boromir's face when he understood she was not alone. She thought about Veradino, the particular quality of autumn light through those windows, the 4 years she had spent there that still lived in her body as the only example she had of what safety had ever felt like. She thought about the fact that she was sitting upright in this room because she had decided, somewhere in the last hour, that she was done disappearing. "All right," she said. He nodded once, moved nothing else, made nothing of it and everything of it. "I need to tell you something," she said. "About the property, about why it matters beyond what I have already told you." She looked at him. "There is something there, something my grandmother left, not just the land." She stopped, choosing her next words with great care. "If my family knows about it, and I think they do, then this is not only about debt. This is about something else entirely, something that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with why I have never in my life been told the full truth of who I am." The room went quiet. Vsevolod leaned forward slightly. "Tell me," he said, and she looked at him. This stranger who had carried her out of a room and stood between her and her brother and said she deserved to be met, and she understood that she was about to cross a line she could not uncross, that whatever came out of her mouth next would change the shape of everything. She took a breath. She opened her mouth. The window behind him shattered. Glass moved through the air like thrown ice, and Vsevolod was already across the room before the sound finished. His body between the window and Militsa, with the automatic precision of a man whose instincts had been forged in places that did not forgive hesitation. She felt the rush of cold air hit her face and heard the fire stutter in its grate, and then his hand was on her arm, pulling her down, and she went without argument, because the part of her that was still a soldier's daughter understood. The geometry of the moment even before her mind caught up. Something had come through the window. Not a person, a stone, heavy and deliberate, wrapped in cloth, and it had landed in the centre of the room and was sitting there on the floor with a patience that objects thrown with intent always seem to have, as if they knew they had already done what they were sent to do. Vsevolod looked at it for 1 second and then looked at the window and then made a decision she could see happen in real time in his body, the way a current changes direction. "Can you walk?" he said. "Yes," she said, and it was partially true, which was going to have to be enough. He crossed to the stone, unwrapped it without touching the cloth any more than necessary, read what was inside in the time it took her to get to her feet, and his face did the thing again. That drawing back behind the surface, that cold and inward going that she was beginning to understand, was what anger looked like on him when he had decided that feeling it fully would cost time he did not have. "What does it say?" she asked. He looked at her. "It says that if you are not delivered to the east gate of the property on Ulitsa Mirova within the hour, your father will go to the city magistrate tomorrow with a statement that you have been taken against your will by a man known for practices that are difficult to disprove and costly to contest." He paused. "And that you are not in your right mind, that you have never been in your right mind, that there are witnesses prepared to attest to a history of instability going back years." She heard it. She let herself hear all of it without flinching away from any of it, and she thought about how long it must have taken them to build that particular architecture. How many conversations had been had. How many small, careful seeds planted in how many drawing rooms. A word here, a concerned expression there, a gentle and sorrowful account of poor Militsa's episodes. Building the coffin long before they needed to put anyone in it. "They have been preparing this for years," she said. "Yes. Which means they planned to use it eventually regardless of whether tonight worked." "Yes. So, even if I had not been found, even if I had died quietly in a corridor the way they intended." She stopped. The story was always going to be told. The property was always going to transfer. I was always going to be made into something that could be erased. He said nothing because there was nothing to say to that which would make it smaller than it was, and he was not, she had learned, a man who made things smaller to make them easier. "Then it doesn't matter what I do tonight," she said. "The story exists. The witnesses exist. I cannot unmake them." "No," he said. "But I can." She looked at him. "Not by force," he said. "By being what I am. By standing in front of what they intend to say, and being the thing that makes it impossible for any person of sense, or standing to repeat it with a straight face." He crossed to her, stopping close, and his voice was level, but there was something underneath it that was neither level nor managed. "Militsa, they can say what they like about a young woman with no money and no allies, and a family prepared to swear to her incapacity. They cannot say the same thing about the ward of a duke. No." The word landed in the room and sat there. "Your ward," she said. "It is the fastest and cleanest legal protection I can offer you tonight. It can be reversed when the property question is settled and you no longer need it. It is a practical arrangement and nothing more, and you do not have to accept it." He held her eyes. "But I am asking you to consider it." She turned it over. She was good at this. At the rapid assessment of options and costs and consequences, it was one of the skills her particular life had sharpened to a very fine point. But she was also bleeding and tired, and the window was broken behind them, and cold air was moving through the room, and somewhere outside, a man who shared her blood was waiting for an answer she was not going to give him. "And what does it cost you?" she asked, "publicly, to attach your name to mine when my family is prepared to call me unstable, and a magistrate is apparently available for the asking?" Something moved across his face. Not irritation. Something more personal than that, and more carefully contained. "I have survived considerably worse damage to my name than association with an honest woman," he said. "And I find that I have lost interest in calculating the cost." She understood what that meant. She understood it with a clarity that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with the fact that she had been watching him all evening, and she knew now, with the particular knowledge that lives in the body before it reaches the mind, that he was not being strategic. He had been strategic earlier. The message to Boromir, the careful management of the physician, the way he had positioned himself at the door. Those had been the moves of a man who thought in terms of angles and leverage and long consequences. This was not that. This was a man who had looked at her and arrived somewhere he had not planned to be and was choosing to stay there anyway. She thought about trust and what it cost and what it meant to extend it to someone when the last people who should have been trustworthy had spent 19 years proving they were not. She thought about the particular loneliness of being cautious for so long that caution had become its own kind of prison, one with no visible walls and no door to find because you had built it so thoroughly from the inside. She thought about Veradino and autumn light and 4 years of being allowed to just exist. "All right," she said. "Your ward, until Veradino is settled." He nodded. And then, before she could prepare for it, or manage it, or put any kind of careful distance around it, he reached out and very briefly, very lightly, put his hand over hers where it was pressed against her wounded side. Not a gesture of romance. Not yet, perhaps not for a long time, perhaps not ever in the way the word usually meant, but something real, something that said, "I see where you are hurting, and I am not going to look away from it." She did not move her hand. They stood there for a moment that was not long in time and considerable in everything else. And then he stepped back and became practical again, and she was grateful for it, because she needed practicality right now, more than she needed anything she did not have a name for. He sent for the person he trusted, a man named Tikhon, who appeared within minutes, and who had the particular quality of someone who had served Vsevolod long enough to communicate entirely in very few words and even fewer expressions. Vsevolod spoke to him quietly, gave him the stone and the cloth, gave him 3 other instructions she was not entirely meant to hear and heard anyway, and Tikhon left. Then Vsevolod wrote 2 things. The first was a legal document, brief and clear, and witnessed by the maid he called back into the room, formalizing his guardianship with the particular authority that meant it would hold until formally contested, which would take time Boromir did not have and money he had already spent. The second was a note he sealed and gave to a footman for the city magistrate. Not a complaint, he explained, but a preemptive account of the evening's events, signed and dated and delivered before Boromir had the chance to deliver his version first. "You cannot wait for people to tell the story," he said. "You have to arrive before them." She watched him work and thought about the version of this evening where she had gone down on that marble floor and stayed down, where no one had been watching, where the story her family had built over years had simply deployed itself without opposition, and she had become what they had always intended her to be, a quietly resolved problem, a name mentioned in sorrowful tones for 1 season and then not mentioned at all. She thought about how close it had been. She thought about how the difference between that version and this one was a man at a window who had noticed something that didn't fit. "You said you noticed me before tonight," she said. He looked up from the second document. "Yes, in the park, and at the Orlenkov dinner." A pause. "I did not say the Orlenkov dinner. No, I saw you there. I assumed you didn't see me. I was seated very far down the table, and I was not, as you may have observed, especially visible in those days." Something in his expression did something she could not quite read, too complex and too quickly managed. "I saw you," he said. And I noticed that your smiles were not real." He looked back at the document. "I found it difficult to stop thinking about why." She sat with that for a moment. "That is an unsettling thing to admit," she said. "Yes," he said, without looking up. "I am aware." The door opened, and Tikhon returned, and spoke 3 words, and Vsevolod stood immediately, and his face had closed again, gone to that outer surface, and she knew before he told her that something had changed. "Boromir did not leave," he said. He is outside with 2 men I do not recognize, and he has sent a second message to the magistrate's office. Someone there is in his pay, and they are moving faster than I accounted for." He looked at her with the particular directness that meant he was not going to soften what came next. "We need to leave this house. Now, I have a property within an hour's carriage ride where you will be safe and where nothing your brother says tonight can reach you before morning, by which time the documents I have sent will have done what they need to do." She stood. The pain was real and present, and she was going to have to work with it, because the alternative was to be here when Boromir came through the door with men and a magistrate's blessing, and whatever version of her life he intended to force into place. "The thing my grandmother left at Veradino," she said, "I still need to tell you." "You can tell me in the carriage," he said. He handed her his coat without ceremony, and she put it on, and it was warm from him, and smelled of wood smoke and winter, and something she did not try to name. They went out through the back of the house, through the kitchen corridor, with its smells of old grease and candle wax. Vsevolod's hand at her elbow, not gripping, just present, and she moved as fast as her side allowed, which was faster than it should have been, and she was going to feel it tomorrow with great thoroughness. The carriage was waiting in the service lane, Tikon already on the box, and Vsevolod helped her in and got in behind her, and the door closed, and they were moving before she had fully settled against the seat. She heard, faintly, as the carriage turned onto the wider street, the sound of raised voices from the direction of the house, Boromir discovering she was gone. She closed her eyes and breathed, and felt the carriage sway, and thought about how different the air tasted out here from how it had tasted in that room all those years, all those careful, diminished years. "The thing my grandmother left," she said. Vsevolod was across from her in the dark carriage, his face barely visible, steady as ever. "My grandmother was not only a landowner," she said. "Her first husband, before my grandfather, was a man who served in a capacity not unlike yours. Documents passed through Veradino during the last years of his life. Documents that were not meant to survive. She kept copies. She told me when I was 9, only told me, no one else, that there were papers hidden in the east wall of the oldest cellar, and that they were not to be found by anyone with the wrong interests." She paused. "I did not understand what she meant when I was 9. I think I understand now." Vsevolod was very still. "What kind of documents?" he said, and his voice had taken on a quality she had not heard from him before, something beneath the steadiness, something alert. "The kind," she said, "that explain why a man like Gennady Sviatkov is involved in the debts of a minor noble family, and why my family is frightened enough to put a blade in their own daughter rather than let those papers come to light." The carriage moved through the dark streets, and the city fell away behind them, and ahead was the road east, and the long winter dark, and somewhere inside Vsevolod Ratimir she could feel it from across the carriage. Something had shifted into a higher and more focused place. He looked at her. She looked back. "You have been sitting on this all evening," he said. "I needed to know if I could trust you first," she said. A long moment. "And now?" he said. She thought about everything, the whole long accumulated weight of the evening, the blade and the ballroom floor, the fire and the corridor and the windows shatter, the document he had written and the coat he had handed her, and the 5 words she was still carrying in her chest. Someone who was that determined to reach the light deserved to have someone meet her there. "Now," she said, "I think we are going to have to move very quickly." And in the dark of the carriage, for the first time all evening, Vsevolod Ratimir almost smiled. The road east was dark and uneven, and the carriage moved through it with the particular urgency of a vehicle being driven by a man who had been given a look from his employer that communicated everything necessary without a single word. Militsa sat with Vsevolod's coat around her shoulders and watched the city lights thin and disappear behind them, and tried to take stock of herself with the same honest efficiency she gave to everything. She was injured. Not critically. The physician had been clear on that much before his loyalties had become questionable, but seriously enough that the movement of the carriage was a sustained and patient argument from her body that she was ignoring. She was tired in a way that went below the physical, the specific exhaustion of someone who had been running on resolve for hours and could feel the resolve beginning to ask questions about its own sustainability. She was sitting across from a man she had not known existed in any personal sense 12 hours ago, and she had told him things she had never told anyone, and she was wearing his coat. She was also, she realized, with some surprise, not afraid. Not in the way she had been afraid for years. That low, constant background fear that had become so familiar, she had stopped identifying it as fear and had started experiencing it simply as the weather of her life. That was gone. In its place was something sharper and cleaner. The specific alertness of a person who has identified the danger and is moving directly toward the management of it, which was entirely different from the dread of waiting for something inevitable and unnamed. She found she preferred it enormously. "Tell me about Tikhon," she said. Vsevolod looked at her. "Why?" "Because we are going to be at your property for at least a day, and possibly longer, and I want to understand who is around me. Also because I have been making assessments of everyone in my vicinity since I was approximately 7 years old, and it calms me." Something in his expression did the thing again, that almost quality, that thing that lived just at the edge of what his face was willing to show. "Tikhon has been with me for 14 years. He was my father's man before he was mine. He has, in that time, been offered bribes on 11 separate occasions that I know of, and has refused all of them and reported each one to me within the hour." "Loyal," she said. "Constitutionally," Vsevolod said. "It is not even a virtue for him. It is simply what he is, the way some people are constitutionally honest or constitutionally suspicious. He is constitutionally unable to be otherwise." "I like him already," she said. "He will be alarmed by you," Vsevolod said, and there was something dry and careful in his voice. "He has strong opinions about the appropriate management of situations involving risk, and you are currently a significant quantity of risk." "And what do you think?" she said. He looked at her for a moment in the swaying dark. "I think that risk is only a problem if you are not prepared for it." She thought about that. She thought about preparation and what it meant, and how Vsevolod Ratimir moved through the world as a man who had made peace with the fact that the world was consistently difficult and had simply gotten very good at the difficulty. There was something restful about it, paradoxically. Being around someone who did not need the world to be other than it was freed you from the exhausting work of pretending it was. She had spent so much of her life pretending. They rode in silence for a while, the comfortable kind, the kind that does not ask anything of you. The countryside outside was flat and pale, under a winter sky that had cleared to show stars, very bright and very cold, and she watched them through the carriage window and thought about her grandmother, about the particular way that woman had moved through a room, as if she was the room's natural centre, and had simply allowed the furniture to arrange itself around her. Militsa had been told she was like her. She had never been told it kindly. "My grandmother's name was Zvonimira," she said, not particularly directing it at him, just releasing it into the carriage because it needed to be said. She was considered eccentric by everyone who did not understand her, and formidable by everyone who did. She kept wolves. Not as pets. She would have found that insulting to both parties. She kept them because she said they were honest, in a way people were not, and she had decided to surround herself only with honesty in her old age. Vsevolod said nothing, but she felt him listening. "She taught me to read maps. Not the decorative kind, the working kind, the kind soldiers and surveyors use. She said a woman who could read the ground she was standing on could never be entirely lost. She paused. I have thought about that a great deal in the past few years. And were you, he said, entirely lost? She considered it honestly. Close, she said. Not entirely. I always knew where I was. I just could not find a way out of it. Until tonight, he said. She looked at him. Until tonight. The carriage slowed and then turned through a gate, and the sound of the wheels changed on a gravel drive, and she looked out to see a house that was not large by the standards of the houses she had grown up being peripheral to, but was solid and well proportioned, and had lights in the windows, which meant Tikhon had sent someone ahead, which meant Vsevolod had planned for multiple contingencies before they had even left the city, which she found she was not surprised by at all. They helped her out and into the house, which was warm and smelled of pine and old wood, and a housekeeper appeared and took the coat from her shoulders with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had served difficult situations before and had opinions about them that she kept entirely to herself. Militsa was brought to a room with a fire already burning and a chair close to it, and she sat in it because standing was beginning to require a level of argument she no longer had the resources for. Vsevolod came in after a few minutes. He had removed his ruined evening coat and was in shirt sleeves again, and he carried 2 cups of something that turned out to be tea so strong it was nearly a solid, and he handed her one and sat in the chair across from her, and they sat in the firelight with their tea and the specific quiet of people who have been through something together and have not yet sorted out what to do with the fact of it. Your family will find that the documents I sent precede them, he said after a while. The magistrate I sent to is not the one in Boromir's pay. By morning there will be a formal account of tonight on record that establishes your condition, your injury, and the circumstances of your protection. It will not end everything. It will make everything considerably more difficult for them. And Veradino? She said. That will take longer. The legal question of what was signed and whether it holds is not a simple one, and I will need to send someone I trust to examine the original documents. If what you believe is correct, and what was signed was done under duress or misrepresentation, there is a strong case. He paused. And the papers your grandmother kept will need to be retrieved before your family understands what they are and acts accordingly. She looked at him. You want to go to Veradino? I want to send someone. You should go yourself, she said. Whatever is in those papers, whoever they involve, they will need someone whose name carries enough weight to make the information usable rather than simply dangerous. She met his eyes. You know that already? Yes, he said. I also know that you are not currently in any condition to travel 3 days east. I wasn't asking to come, she said. He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to be able to read, that particular quality of attention that meant she had said something that matched with something he already thought, and he was deciding what to do about the agreement. You are not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? I don't know exactly. Someone more broken, perhaps, given the circumstances. She thought about that. She thought about what broken looked like and whether she was it, and arrived at the same conclusion she always did, which was that there was a difference between being damaged and being broken, and she had always managed to stay on the correct side of that line, not always by much, not always without cost, but consistently. Her grandmother had taught her that too, without saying it directly, just by being a woman who had survived considerable damage and remained entirely herself. I am not broken, she said. I am very tired and somewhat punctured, and I have just detonated the only life I have ever known. But I am not broken. No, he said. You are not. The fire moved. She held her cup in both hands, and felt the warmth of it, and thought about how the last time she had sat in a firelit room and felt, not safe exactly, but present, had been at Veradino. How that had been 10 years ago. How she had been carrying the weight of the absence of it ever since, without fully naming what she was carrying. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask. When this is over, when the property is settled and the documents are dealt with, and whatever your legal guardianship needs to be to serve its purpose has served it." She paused, choosing the words carefully because they mattered, and she was done being careless with the things that mattered. "What do you want? From this? From the direction this is going?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she appreciated it because she knew now that his silences were never evasion. They were him giving the question the actual weight it deserved. "I want," he said slowly, "to find out who you are when you are not surviving. When there is no blade and no ballroom and no family arranging its accounting around your existence." He looked at her steadily. "I want to find out what Militsa Volkonskaya is like when she is not being required to be something smaller than she is." She felt that move through her all the way down. "That could take some time," she said. "I have time," he said. "I may be difficult," she said. "I am not practiced at being known. I have habits from years of managing alone that will not disappear because the situation has changed. I will be suspicious and occasionally closed, and I will not always ask for help when I need it." "I know," he said. "You cannot know that yet," she said. "You have known me for one evening." "One evening," he said, "during which you were stabbed, carried out of a ballroom, confronted by your brother, wrapped in a legal document, smuggled out of a house through a kitchen corridor, and have still managed to be the most direct person I have spoken to in recent memory." He paused. "I am not concerned about difficult. I am considerably more familiar with difficult than with its absence." She looked at him and thought about the word trust and what it was made of, what the actual material of it was when you got past the idea of it. She thought it was probably made of exactly this: moments that were small enough to be overlooked and large enough in accumulation to mean everything. A man who moved before she fell, a coat placed around shoulders without ceremony, a face that received her honesty without flinching, the word "we" used quietly and without flourish, as if it were simply the accurate description of the situation. She thought about Veradino and autumn light, and the wolves her grandmother had kept, and the maps she had been taught to read, and the papers hidden in the east wall of the oldest cellar that she was going to reclaim along with everything else that had been taken from her. She thought about the woman she had been this morning, making herself small in a house that had never been home, and the woman she was in this firelit room, choosing, for the first time in her life, what she reached for. She set down her cup and looked at Vsevolod Ratimir across the fire. "I am going to need new clothes," she said. "Everything I own is in a house I am not going back to." Something in his face moved, and this time it completed itself. It arrived at the surface and became real, and it was a smile, genuine and unhurried, the kind that came from deep enough inside a person that it could not be performed, and it changed his face in a way she had not been prepared for and was going to need some time to account for. "That," he said, "is manageable." She looked at him and thought that she had spent 19 years being told, in every way that did not require words, that she was not enough and not wanted and not worth the trouble of keeping. She thought about how long those messages lived in the body, even after the mind had decided not to believe them anymore. She thought about the work it was going to take, the patient and imperfect work, to learn how to exist in a life that had room in it. She thought she was ready to begin. Outside the window the stars were very bright and very cold, and the road behind them was empty, and the road ahead went east toward a house that belonged to her. toward papers that were going to change things she could not yet fully predict, toward a future that was not finished being written. She was in it, fully, finally, irrevocably in it. And for the first time, in as long as she could remember, that felt like exactly where she was supposed to be. If you're still with me till this END, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications. I truly appreciate you for sticking till the end. I hope you enjoyed every bit of the story. I will be there in the comments.